So, if you are at all aware of what's going on in sort of the non-mainstream news here, you have heard of the Russian funding right-wing commentators kind of scandal, which is very strange if you go down to details of it, but we'll get to that. The main allegation is that Russians that are connected to the Russian government and the RT News, that's a big Russian newspaper, they funded right-wing commentators. Now, most of these people apparently are considered victims because they had no idea they were being funded by the Russians. They were lied to. And there's also no proof I've seen so far that they actually influence these people in what they say. They more like picked people who already had views that they agreed with and wanted to promote, and then paid them money to appear on their channel and promote their channel. The new fictitious Russian media company. And the allegation essentially is that they were foreign influencers who did not register with the government as such, which is why it's illegal. Because obviously you have many governments all over the world trying to influence elections and public opinion. It's just that you have to register as a foreign actor in order to do so legally. So let's get into it. This is the Washington Post. Inside Tenet Media, the pro-Trump supergroup allegedly funded by Russia. I'm gonna stop here already. I think there's a lie here. I know, this is just the first sentence, just the headline. But the pro-Trump supergroup, the basically owners or founders of Tenet, not the people who pay for it, those were the Russians. But the people who founded and sort of managed the whole thing were Lauren Chen and her husband. She's a prominent right-wing YouTuber. And the thing is, this is a tweet from Lauren Chen from August 26th, so it's like 2 weeks ago or so. She says here, I supported Trump when he said he wanted to leave it as a state's issue. That's fine. But saying you would go out of your way to veto an abortion ban, that you'd potentially use your executive power to overturn congressional legislation and the will of the people, no, I'm done. Essentially, she's saying here she will not vote for Trump. And I understand this is not the first time she said it. Or rather, not the last. Regardless, how is your prime suspect, the manager of the entire network, saying they won't vote for Trump if this is a Russian supergroup that's promoting Trump? That makes no sense at all. So the idea that the Russians are trying to create public opinion in favor of Trump to help him get elected, yeah, that doesn't fly, I'm afraid. Not to mention, Putin a couple of days ago, said that he would support Kamala Harris, incidentally. I'm not sure if he was actually serious or sarcastic, but regardless, this does not fly. I'm sorry. So let's start with the article, shall we? Even by the standards of right-wing social media, last year's rollout for Tenet Media was strange. Right, because normally right-wing social media is strange, that's the implication. Very fair and balanced. Videos of the event featured influencers such as Benny Johnson and Dave Rubin talking portentously about freedom and censorship while bathed in a nightclub-style purple light. Tim Pool, a much-followed right-wing commentator, he's a milquetoast fence-sitter, always was. He's slightly less so now, he has been moving a bit to the right, but he's still exceedingly moderate if you actually look at his position on main issues. The guy is not some conservative, he's very right-wing, he's very centrist. So Tim Pool proclaimed that Tenet would be a kind of YouTube supergroup that would compete with the untrustworthy mainstream media. I worked for several massive corporate news organizations. Pool, a former Vice News staffer, said in his own purple-toned promotional video, and what did I learn? They lie. And he's right. I have seen so much evidence that the mainstream lies. It's amazing. From its first days, the online star's Tenet called its talent seemed to question why this collective existed at all. They all still posted on their own channels, and Tenet's view counts were noticeably low. We're talking like a couple of thousand. Basically, completely irrelevant. The idea that Russia managed to influence elections at all with this entire scheme is laughable. In his own promotional video for Tenet, YouTuber Matt Christensen even conceded that the company he had joined could well be a house of cards. What if I've been duped? What if this is all a ruse? Christensen said. Still, he maintained that he trusted the site's founders, conservative social media commentator Lauren Chen and her husband Liam Donovan. They are veterans in this industry and they have a lot of views, a lot of people who listen to them. I watched some of the stuff at some point. I stopped since then because I wasn't 100% on board and I didn't, I guess, find it entertaining or informative in the way I wanted. But fair play to you if you like them, if you listen to them. Although I understand that their entire channel was nuked, not just Tenet, but their personal ones too. And they were not yet convicted of anything, which is worrying if you support freedom of speech and the idea that you are innocent until proven guilty. Not to mention, even somebody who's convicted of ending someone or doing adult things to people who are not yet adults, you still get to keep your social media. It's only being right-wing that any scandal allows you to be censored. If you're left-wing and you do horrible things, you keep your channels. If you are a criminal and you do horrible things, you keep your channel. If you are right-wing and you're accused of anything, then you lose your channel. That's the way it goes right now. And I don't think that we should be taking people's social media for crimes unless maybe they specifically use social media to call for violence or recruit for criminal organizations or terrorist organizations. Then maybe you could say that it's necessary, but they did nothing of the sort. So I don't understand why. Like shutting down Tenet because it was an illegal organization, if it was, that's fine. But the personal channels of the people that had nothing to do with this, I mean, they did none of the illegal activity on their own channels, so why are you shutting them down? That's my point. Anyway, so Christensen got his answer about Tenet on Wednesday, when the Justice Department indicted 2 employees of Russian government-funded RT for illegally operating Tenet behind the scenes. Rather than being a domestic network of social media accounts, prosecutors alleged that Tenet was a foreign influence operation funded with roughly $10 million in Russian money. That's quite a bit of money for something of this sort. The indictment outlines how prosecutors say this money was sent overseas and shared among the conservative YouTubers through whom Russia sought to promote its agenda. Most of the 6 members of Tenet's talent team claim they did not know the money was coming from Russia. Canadian activist Lauren Chen has not issued a statement as of this writing. The indictment alleges that Tenet's founders and Russian backers misled at least 2 of them, Paul and Rubin, about the source of Tenet's funding by inventing a fictitious Belgian investor named Edward Grigorian. So that's what I meant earlier. The entire investigation is treating Tim Pool and Dave Rubin as victims in this. Although they got a lot of money for what seems to be very little in terms of work, and they didn't seem to have actually been issued orders on what to say. They just sort of were used, I guess, to promote the channel through their already successful brand recognition, if you will. I knew absolutely nothing about any of this fraudulent activity, Rubin, who rose to prominence by fashioning himself as a centrist critic of liberalism, said in a statement. I mean, if you listen to Dave Rubin a bit, he has many left-wing guests too, and he's not completely opposed to what they're saying. In fact, he agrees on some of the issues at least. If you go back like 10, 20 years, the left wing back then, that's basically where Dave Rubin seems to be, and he definitely would be accepted as left wing back then. It's amazing how basically being right wing is just saying what the left used to say about a decade ago, really. News that some of the right's biggest online stars had apparently unwittingly taken millions from the Kremlin provoked a wave of Schadenfreude from their critics. I want to stop you here for a moment. Anybody remember this? Hunter Biden received a 3.5 million payment from ex-Moscow mayor's wife. There was also a story about how a lot of people, Democrats, high-ranking officials, including, I believe, Hillary Clinton, received Russian money and sold uranium, the United States uranium, to Moscow. Anybody remember that story? Or about the prosecutor in Ukraine that was investigating the company Hunter Biden was working on and suddenly was fired after his dad threatened to cut off aid if he wasn't fired? American aid to Ukraine? None of those stories ring a bell? Never mind then. It might have been my imagination. Anyway, so we are saying here that Chen and Donovan aren't named in the indictment, but Tennessee corporate records identify them as Tenet's founders, which is basically the one point I'm curious about in this entire story. Were they involved in illegal activity? Because it's out of the ordinary for the people who funded the company that you are alleging was a front for Russian influence to not be a part of the indictment. What's going on? Are they still under investigation, or are you saying that they didn't know where the money came from, which would be quite strange? I'm not sure what's going on with those two. Anyway, prosecutors allege that the founders knew the funding was coming from Moscow and privately acknowledged in messages to each other that their backers were Russian. Yeah, but being backed by Russians isn't necessarily illegal. The question is, did they know that they were being backed by the Russian government? Chen, who uses the social media handle Roaming Millennial, is well connected on the right. She has 572,000 YouTube subscribers on her own channel, and until recently hosted 2 online shows for Glenn Beck's website, The Blaze. But while Chen is a conservative influencer in her own right, her involvement in Tenet was not publicized, which is interesting. Chen did not respond to requests for comment. In an email, Blaze CEO Tyler Cardon said Lauren Chen was an independent contractor whose contract has been terminated. So people are cutting ties with her, and along with the silence in terms of the indictment, I think it bodes ill for her and her husband. YouTube said in a statement on Thursday evening that it had terminated Tenet Media's channel after learning of the indictment, as well as 4 separate channels operated by Chen as part of our ongoing efforts to combat coordinated influence operations, which is nonsense. We know that the US government has a lot of influence of the exact same sort, and other governments as well have similar operations. Nobody cares. Do you remember this little video?
Responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities, Field Los communities, Eastern Iowa communities, and Michigan communities. We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS4 News produces. But we are like our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing biased false news has become all too common.
Well, I think this has been the point has been made. Anyway, the most famous sentence from the clip I just showed you is, this is extremely dangerous for our democracy, which they all echo at the same time. I have never heard of anybody investigating this coordinated media operation at all, or that any of the channels involved were in any way penalized. Interesting. Now, it says here that much of the money went to Rubin and Poole. I suppose it makes sense. They are very well known and also more moderate, I think, than some of the others. So they might be good brand ambassadors for a Russian influence campaign to try and divert attention from itself, meaning to appear mainstream and moderate amongst the right. According to the indictment, Rubin received $400,000 a month for 16 videos, plus a performance bonus and a $100,000 signing bonus, all for a series in which Rubin commented on dumb internet clips that often received just roughly 1,000 views per episode. How does that serve Russian interests anyway? And please, can I have some of that money? I'd be very, very appreciative. That's a lot of money for something so silly. Also, 1,000 views per episode. I mean, okay. Tenet also proved lucrative for Poole, who made $1,000 per episode for a weekly show he hosted, according to prosecutors. The same month that Tenet launched, Poole purchased a skate park in Martinsburg, as well as other significant real estate purchases in the same area. Yeah, but he's already rich, so I don't think that the $100,000 is what he used to buy that. I don't think that's what made a difference for him. Anyway, Rubin and Poole initially asked for more information about where the money was coming from, prompting the Russians to invent Eduard Grigorian, a fictional Belgian banker committed to free speech. The indictment states, Grigorian's name was misspelled on many documents, and the influencers could find no evidence online that he worked at the real bank where he claimed to have made his money. Plus, a profile of Grigorian created by the Russians cited his interest in social justice, a red flag for Rubin according to an email sent by one of Tenet's founders. I think it may be because that's usually a term used by liberals, but we're trying to create a conservative network. Yeah, it seems as though they were inept. This seems as though it was a very expensive and very clumsy influence operation where they achieved nothing and never had a chance to achieve anything. They basically picked people that were not on board with what they were actually trying to do, did not actually receive orders or make any changes to their content, at least that I see so far. There's one allegation down, and we'll get to that, but mostly it seems as though they just made the same content they usually did, or they made silly content that had no relevance. The content reached basically nobody, 1,000 to a few thousand views, and they didn't even manage to hoodwink these people properly. Like, they had some inkling, it seems, that something was out of line. They just couldn't find evidence that it was that bad, and they were, I guess, tempted by the stupid amount of money. So I'm not sure who approved this, but I think they need to be fired, honestly, on the Russian side, for being an inept waste of government money. Although, to be fair, if that was cause for firing, I think basically large parts of pretty much every government on Earth should be fired. And I'm not against such a move, just saying. Anyway, it says here that Tenet managed to reach some prominent conservative figures. Former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy and Republican National Committee chairwoman Laura Trump both appeared on In the Arena, a Tenet-funded show hosted by Johnson. Even after recruiting their talent, though, the Russians purportedly running Tenet were frustrated with Tenet's lack of success. Like many media executives, they worried that their employees were doing more to promote their personal social media brands than their new outlet. In February 2024, Elena, I cannot pronounce that name, Afanasieva, one of the indicted RT employees, allegedly complained under an alias in a Tenet chatroom that the influencers she had hired weren't boosting Tenet enough. I know this is not an obligation, but we are falling behind with numbers. I am sure you were falling behind. Still frustrated, according to prosecutors, Afanasieva invented a second alias to put more pressure on Tenet's influencers to promote the site. I guess I missed the part where it says basically, or was it in another article? Whatever. Basically, they're saying that they had one instance at least where the Russians tried to ask them to specifically cover a certain subject. It was a terrorist attack, I believe, on I forgot what it was in Russia. Basically, I believe that ISIS took responsibility or some other terrorist, specifically Muslim organization, and the Russians wanted it covered as a Ukrainian action. I believe there was an influencer that once questioned whether it was actually the terrorist organization that took responsibility or whether it had anything to do with Ukraine. And that was pretty much it. Also, that specific influencer denied that he received any instructions from the Russians or from anyone from the internet to cover that one. There's actually no proof that he was ordered to do it at all. These people that were recruited typically were recruited because they were anti-war, because they believed the war in Ukraine was unjust for the US to intervene in, because they are skeptical and critical of the current US government. So it is not out of the ordinary for them to question things like that. Anyway, you can see that my whole shtick here is to say this seems like a nothing burger. We've had so much worse scandals on the left that were basically not covered and not prosecuted. And apart from maybe Lauren Chen and her husband, who might have known the whole deal and therefore committed the crime, the rest of them are basically guilty of allowing greed to bypass common sense and taking money from an organization that seems suspicious. I suppose that could be mitigated with the knowledge that Lauren Chen and her husband were actually legitimate commentators on the right, very popular for a long time, and so people had some trust in their credibility. That might have been why they overlooked this Gregorian fella, seeming exceedingly suspicious, and allowed their greed to take over. Anyway, if you have any different points of view on this, I'd love to know. And if you have any criticism or suggestions for me, as I'm still a beginner on YouTube, I would also very much appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.